It was green. Too green, apparently. That's what they told Margaret Chan when they served her the citation. Standing in her driveway at 7 a.m., still in her robe, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold while she read the HOA violation notice. Her front yard was too green, too lush, too beautiful. The citation was typed on official letterhead, signed by the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association Board of Directors. Violation of Landscape Ordinance 14.3, excessive water usage creating unfair aesthetic advantage over neighboring properties. Fine, $500. Compliance required within 30 days or face legal action. Margaret stared at the paper, then at her yard, then back at the paper. Her grass was perfect. Not artificial perfect, but naturally perfect. Rich emerald blades that stayed green through drought, through winter, through the kind of Texas heat that turned most lawns into brown patches of surrender. She'd moved to Willowbrook Estates 3 years ago, a quiet widow looking for a fresh start in a community that promised order, beauty, and peace. The HOA rules were extensive, but she'd followed every one. Mailbox Regulation 7.2, black metal, traditional style. Fence Code 12.1, white vinyl, 6 feet maximum height. Landscape Requirement 14.1, maintain front yard, no dead plants, no weeds. She'd exceeded their requirements, and now they were punishing her for it. Margaret folded the citation, walked back inside, and called her lawyer. Not because she was angry, because she was tired of being misunderstood. Welcome to Heartland Tales. Before we continue with this incredible story, tell us in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you think stories like this deserve to be heard, please hit that subscribe button to support our channel. We're growing every day, and your support means everything to us. Asterisk asterisk. The problem started 18 months earlier, during the worst drought in Texas history. The summer of 2023 had broken every heat record in the books. Temperatures soared past 110 degrees for weeks straight. The city implemented water restrictions. Sprinkler systems were limited to twice weekly usage between 6 a.m. and 10 a.m. only. Most residents watched helplessly as their carefully manicured lawns transformed into patches of dead grass and bare dirt. But Margaret's yard defied nature itself. While every other lawn in Willowbrook Estates turned brown and patchy, Margaret's yard remained impossibly green. Not just green, but vibrant, thick, lush. The kind of perfect that made neighbors slow down when they walked past, made children want to roll in the grass, made real estate agents point and whisper about property values. The contrast was jarring. Walking down Elm Street was like entering 2 different climates. Brown, dying lawns stretched for blocks, punctuated by the occasional artificial turf installation or rock garden. And then, like an oasis in a desert, Margaret's property appeared. Emerald grass so thick you could lose a golf ball in it. So green it almost hurt to look at directly in the sunlight. Margaret herself seemed oblivious to the attention. Every morning at dawn, she could be seen in her garden wearing the same faded denim overalls and wide-brimmed straw hat. She moved methodically through her yard, not with the hurried pace of someone trying to beat the heat, but with the careful deliberation of someone who understood exactly what she was doing. She would kneel beside flower beds, examining individual plants with a magnifying glass. She carried a small notebook where she recorded observations in precise handwriting. She tested soil pH with a digital meter, adjusted irrigation timers by increments of minutes, and collected grass clippings in labeled containers. To her neighbors, she looked like an eccentric retiree with too much time on her hands. They had no idea they were watching one of the most respected botanical researchers in the country conducting field experiments. The first complaints came from directly across the street. The Hendersons, a young couple who'd moved in 6 months after Margaret, had watched their own carefully manicured lawn shrivel despite twice-weekly watering and expensive fertilizer treatments. Brad Henderson was a software engineer who approached lawn care like a coding problem: systematic, data-driven, expensive. He'd installed smart sprinklers controlled by weather apps, imported Kentucky bluegrass seed that cost $200 per bag, and hired a lawn service that charged $300 monthly for treatments. Nothing worked. By June, their grass looked like straw. Margaret's looked like the 18th hole at Augusta National. Brad started timing Margaret's sprinkler system with a stopwatch. He installed a security camera pointed toward her yard, ostensibly for home security but really to monitor her watering schedule. He analyzed weather patterns, tracked rainfall, and calculated water usage down to the gallon. His wife, Jessica, was less analytical but equally frustrated. She'd grown up in a house where lawn care was a point of family pride. Her father had won neighborhood beautification awards 3 years running. She'd moved to Willowbrook Estates specifically because the HOA promised maintained property values through strict landscaping standards. Watching Margaret's perfect lawn from their kitchen window every morning became an obsession. Jessica started taking photos, documenting the impossible greenness from different angles and times of day. She created a folder on her phone labeled Evidence, filled with hundreds of pictures of Margaret's grass. Then came the Johnsons from 2 houses down. Their front yard had cost them $8,000 in professional landscaping, complete with imported soil and a sprinkler system that ran on a timer every morning at 5 a.m. Tom Johnson was a retired bank executive who treated his lawn like a financial investment. Every dollar spent on fertilizer, every gallon of water, every hour of professional maintenance was calculated against projected property value returns. By July, despite employing a team of landscapers and spending another $2,000 on drought-resistant grass varieties, their grass was patchy and brown. Margaret's was still perfect. Not just perfect, it seemed to be getting greener. The Johnsons' landscaping company was baffled. They sent soil specialists, irrigation experts, and a plant pathologist. Everyone reached the same conclusion. The grass was dying despite perfect care. The soil was properly fertilized, the watering schedule was optimal, the seed varieties were appropriate for the climate. Meanwhile, Margaret's lawn continued to thrive with what appeared to be minimal effort. By August, the whisper started. At the community pool, wives would gather around the shallow end while their children played, their conversations inevitably turning to water bills and lawn maintenance. The pool area offered a perfect vantage point to see Margaret's property in the distance, its green expanse visible even from 3 blocks away. "She has to be using gray water," whispered Linda Morrison, a real estate agent who lived on Maple Street. "There's no way grass stays that green in this heat without cheating somehow." "I heard she waters at night," added Patricia Cole, whose own lawn had given up the fight in late June against city ordinances. "That's why it's so green." The speculation grew more elaborate with each poolside conversation. Some claimed Margaret had installed an illegal well. Others insisted she was using industrial fertilizers banned for residential use. A few even suggested she'd replaced her entire lawn with artificial turf, so realistic it fooled everyone. At the mailbox cluster, the morning ritual of collecting mail and newspapers became an informal intelligence-gathering operation. Men would linger longer than necessary, ostensibly checking their mail but actually studying Margaret's property from across the street. "Look at that grass," muttered Dave Kim, shaking his head as he sorted through bills and advertisements. "My water bill was $400 last month just trying to keep my front yard alive. Hers has to be double that." "Has to be," agreed Mike Stevens, whose corner lot had given him a premium view of the neighborhood's lawn care struggles. "Either that or she's got some secret nobody else knows about." The men would nod knowingly, as if sharing a conspiracy theory they all understood but couldn't quite prove. They'd worked hard their entire lives to afford homes in a community like Willowbrook Estates. They'd followed the rules, paid their dues, maintained their properties according to HOA standards. The idea that someone could achieve better results with apparently less effort violated their fundamental understanding of fairness. At the monthly HOA meetings, held in the community center's multipurpose room, questions were raised about enforcement of watering restrictions. The meetings, which had previously focused on budget approvals and holiday decoration guidelines, became increasingly dominated by lawn care concerns. "I think we need to investigate water usage more thoroughly," suggested Brad Henderson during the August meeting. "Some residents might be exceeding their allotted consumption." "The city provides usage reports," responded Richard Pemberton, the HOA president. "Everyone appears to be in compliance with municipal restrictions. But what about the quality differences?" pressed Jessica Henderson. "Shouldn't there be some standard for lawn maintenance that prevents excessive disparity between properties?" Pemberton, a retired insurance executive who'd been elected on a platform of maintaining property values, understood the subtext. The Hendersons weren't really concerned about water usage. They were concerned about being outperformed by a quiet widow who seemed to make lawn care look effortless. Margaret attended every meeting. She sat in the back row, always in the same seat by the window, polite and quiet, listening to her neighbors complain about their dying lawns while casting pointed glances in her direction. She brought a small thermos of tea and a notebook where she occasionally jotted observations, though never about the meeting discussions. She never defended herself, never explained, never offered to share her secret. When board members asked direct questions about her lawn care routine, She provided factual answers without elaboration. Yes, she watered twice weekly as required. Yes, she used commercially available fertilizer. No, she didn't employ a professional lawn service. Her responses were technically accurate but somehow unsatisfying to her questioners. They expected either defensiveness or explanation. Instead, they got polite cooperation that revealed nothing about how she achieved such extraordinary results. After each meeting, Margaret would fold her notebook, cap her thermos, and walk home alone. Neighbors would watch her leave, then immediately resume their conversations about water usage and property standards, their voices dropping to whispers as soon as she was out of earshot. She just listened, and went home, and watched her grass grow greener every day. What her neighbors didn't know was that Margaret's evening routine included detailed documentation of every aspect of her yard's condition. Temperature readings taken at soil level. pH measurements recorded in multiple locations. Growth patterns photographed and measured. Pest populations counted and cataloged. Her notebook wasn't filled with meeting notes. It was filled with scientific data collected over months of careful observation. Data that would eventually revolutionize drought-resistant landscaping across the Southwest. But for now, it was just the private record of a woman who understood that the most important discoveries often happen in silence, away from the opinions and expectations of others. The HOA board members were exactly what you'd expect from a suburban Texas community that prided itself on order and property values. Richard Pemberton, the president, was a retired insurance executive who'd spent 30 years investigating fraud claims. He treated HOA violations like potential felony cases, approaching each complaint with methodical documentation and systematic investigation. Pemberton lived in a corner house that gave him visual access to most of the neighborhood. He'd installed security cameras that captured his own property but also provided clear views of adjacent yards. He claimed this was for security purposes, but his neighbors suspected he used the footage to monitor compliance with HOA regulations. His approach to Margaret's situation was purely analytical. If her grass was impossibly green, there had to be a logical explanation. If the explanation wasn't obvious, there had to be a hidden violation. He'd spent his career uncovering insurance fraud by following paper trails and finding discrepancies. A perfect lawn in the middle of a drought was just another puzzle to solve. Sarah Martinez, the secretary, was a real estate agent who saw every unkempt lawn as a direct threat to her commission checks. She'd built her business on the promise that Willowbrook Estates maintained higher property values through strict community standards. When clients asked about neighborhood stability, she pointed to the HOA's enforcement record as proof that their investment was protected. Martinez had sold houses to both the Hendersons and the Johnsons. She'd personally promised them that the community's landscaping requirements would ensure their properties appreciated consistently. Margaret's perfect lawn wasn't just an anomaly. It was a threat to the uniform mediocrity that Martinez had marketed as stability. She'd started documenting property conditions throughout the neighborhood, taking photographs that she filed in color-coded folders organized by address. Margaret's file was the thickest, filled with images that captured her lawn from every angle and at different times of day. Jim Kowalski, the treasurer, was an engineer who believed every problem had a logical solution and every solution required proper documentation and systematic implementation. He'd volunteered for the HOA board because he genuinely wanted to improve the community through organized, methodical management. Kowalski had initially admired Margaret's lawn from a technical perspective. As someone who appreciated precision and excellence, he recognized that her results represented mastery of complex variables: soil composition, water management, timing, plant selection. He'd actually wanted to ask her for advice about his own struggling yard. But as complaints mounted and board pressure increased, Kowalski found himself treating Margaret's lawn as an engineering problem that needed to be solved rather than an achievement that should be celebrated. They'd been elected on a platform of maintaining property values and community standards. They took their job seriously. Maybe too seriously. The first formal complaint came in September. An anonymous letter submitted to the board claimed that Margaret Chin was violating community water restrictions by overwatering her lawn. The letter included photographs of her yard taken from the street, with arrows pointing to particularly green sections and handwritten notes about obvious sprinkler overuse. The board investigated. They checked water usage records. Margaret's monthly bill was actually lower than average for the neighborhood. They installed a monitor to track her sprinkler system. She watered twice a week, same as everyone else, for exactly the permitted duration. But her grass stayed green. Impossibly, stubbornly, beautifully green. The second complaint came in October. This time it wasn't anonymous. The Hendersons filed a formal grievance claiming that Margaret's excessive lawn care was creating an unfair aesthetic imbalance that was affecting their property value. They demanded an investigation into what chemicals or treatments she was using to achieve such unnatural results. The board sent a certified letter requesting that Margaret provide documentation of all fertilizers, pesticides, and lawn care products used on her property. Margaret responded with receipts from Home Depot. Basic grass seed. Standard fertilizer. Nothing exotic. Nothing expensive. Nothing that wasn't available to every other homeowner in the community. But her grass stayed green. Greener, if anything. The third complaint came in November, and this one was different. It wasn't about water usage or chemicals. It was about fairness. The Johnsons, the Hendersons, and 3 other families had banded together to argue that Margaret's lawn was creating an unfair competitive advantage that was making their own properties look neglected by comparison. They wanted the HOA to enforce a maximum standard for lawn care. If everyone else's grass was brown, Margaret should be brown too. If everyone else's yard looked average, Margaret's should look average too. Equality, they called it. Community standards. Richard Pemberton, the HOA president, privately thought the whole thing was ridiculous. But he'd been elected to enforce the rules, and when 7 families filed a formal complaint, he had to take action. The board held an emergency meeting on a Tuesday night in November. Margaret was invited to attend. She sat in the front row this time, still quiet, still polite, still offering no explanation for her perfect lawn. Pemberton read the complaint aloud. Excessive lawn maintenance creating aesthetic disparity within the community. Possible violation of the community covenant regarding uniform neighborhood appearance. Potential negative impact on property values for non-compliant neighbors. He asked Margaret if she had anything to say in her defense. She stood up slowly, looked around the room at her neighbors, at the board members, at the people who'd made her grass the center of their community drama. She spoke clearly, calmly, for exactly 30 seconds. I moved here for peace. I follow every rule. I pay my dues. I don't bother anyone. My grass is green because I take care of it. That's not a crime. That's not a violation. That's just gardening. She sat back down. The room was silent. The board voted 4-1 in favor of issuing a formal warning. Margaret had 30 days to bring her lawn into compliance with community aesthetic standards. If she refused, she would face fines and potential legal action. Margaret nodded once and left the meeting. She didn't seem angry. She didn't seem surprised. She just seemed tired. The warning letter arrived the next week. Margaret read it, folded it, and put it in a drawer with all the other complaints. Then she went outside and watered her grass. Winter came early that year. Most of the neighborhood lawns went dormant, turning brown and patchy as the temperature dropped. Margaret's grass stayed green. Not just green, but vibrant. Thick. Perfect. The complaints multiplied. Phone calls to the board. Emails to the management company. Anonymous notes left in mailboxes demanding action. The perfect lawn had become the neighborhood obsession. In January, the board hired a professional lawn care company to inspect Margaret's property. The expert walked around her yard for 2 hours, taking soil samples, testing pH levels, examining the grass roots under a magnifying glass. His report was 3 pages long and concluded with a single sentence. No evidence of chemical enhancement, artificial treatment, or irrigation violation. Lawn appears to be naturally healthy and well-maintained. The board rejected the report. They hired a second expert, then a third. Each came to the same conclusion. Margaret's grass was just naturally perfect. But the complaints continued. The pressure mounted. The board meetings became heated. Neighbors took sides. Property values became the battleground. Margaret Chen's front yard had divided the entire community. In March, the board voted to change the community covenant. New Rule 14.3. No lawn shall exceed the average aesthetic standard of the immediate neighborhood. Any property creating visual disparity through excessive lawn care shall be subject to fines and compliance requirements. The rule was clearly written for one person. Margaret Chen. Her grass was too green. Her yard was too perfect. Her dedication to her property was too much. The citation was served in April. $500 fine. 30 days to comply. Bring your lawn down to average standards or face legal action. Margaret hired a lawyer. Not to fight the fine. To fight the principle. The case went to court in June. Margaret Chen versus Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. The local newspaper picked up the story with the headline, "Woman Sued for Having Too Perfect Lawn." Within 24 hours, the story had been shared across social media platforms and picked up by national news outlets. CNN ran a segment called The Perfect Lawn Paradox. Fox News covered it as an example of HOA overreach. The Today Show interviewed a legal expert about property rights and community standards. Margaret's front yard became a symbol in a larger cultural debate about suburban conformity and individual excellence. The attention was overwhelming for someone who'd spent 3 years trying to live quietly. Reporters knocked on Margaret's door daily. Neighbors she'd never spoken to suddenly wanted to be interviewed about their experiences with the grass controversy. Real estate speculators called offering to buy her house for cash. Margaret declined all interview requests. She issued a single statement through her lawyer, "I just want to tend my garden in peace." The courtroom was packed on the day of the hearing. Local media filled the press section. HOA board members sat on one side, flanked by their attorney and several supporting neighbors. Margaret sat on the other side, alone except for her lawyer, still quiet, still polite, still offering no public explanation for her perfect grass. The gallery buzzed with conversation as people filed in. Garden Club members had driven from 3 counties away to observe the proceedings. Property rights activists carried signs reading "Excellence is not a crime." A group of retirees wore matching T-shirts that said Team Margaret. Judge Patricia Wallace had been assigned the case somewhat reluctantly. She'd handled property disputes for 15 years, mostly involving fence lines and tree removals. She'd never presided over a case where someone was being sued for having grass that was too green. The bailiff called the court to order. The room fell silent except for the hum of air conditioning and the soft scratch of court reporters' fingers on keyboards. The HOA's lawyer presented their case methodically. Community standards, property values, aesthetic balance, the need for uniform neighborhood appearance. Margaret's lawn was disruptive to community harmony. Margaret's lawyer was a young woman named Jennifer Park who specialized in property rights cases. She listened to the HOA's arguments, took notes, and waited for her turn. When she stood up, she walked to the judge's bench and placed a single photograph on the evidence table. An aerial view of Willowbrook Estates taken from a drone. The entire neighborhood visible from above. "Your Honor," she said quietly, "I'd like to present the real reason Margaret Chin's lawn is so green." The courtroom fell silent. The HOA lawyers shifted uncomfortably. Margaret looked up for the first time, meeting her attorney's eyes with something that might have been relief. Mrs. Chin didn't want to tell anyone. She's a private person. But she's also a retired professor of botany from the University of Texas. She spent 30 years researching drought-resistant native grasses. The lawn that's caused all this trouble isn't just beautiful. It's a living laboratory. Jennifer Park walked to the center of the courtroom, addressing the judge but speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. 3 years ago, Mrs. Chin planted her entire front yard with a hybrid grass species she developed during her academic career. It's designed to thrive in Texas heat. It requires less water than traditional grass. It stays green year-round. It's naturally pest-resistant. It's exactly what Texas needs during climate change. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Margaret sat motionless, her secret finally revealed. Mrs. Chin never patented her grass, never commercialized it, never sold it. She just wanted to live quietly in a community that appreciated beautiful lawns. She never expected to be punished for being too good at growing grass. Jennifer Park placed another document on the evidence table. This is a letter from the Texas Department of Agriculture. They've been trying to reach Mrs. Chin for 2 years. They want to study her grass hybrid. They want to distribute it to communities struggling with drought. They want to give her an award for environmental innovation. The HOA lawyers stared at the letter. Richard Pemberton, the board president, looked like he wanted to disappear. "Mrs. Chin's lawn isn't just green, Your Honor. It's the future. And the Willowbrook Estates HOA wants to fine her for it." The judge looked at Margaret, who was still sitting quietly in her chair, still not speaking, still not asking for attention or praise. "Mrs. Chin," the judge said gently, "would you like to address the court?" Margaret stood up slowly. She looked around the courtroom at her neighbors, at the board members, at the reporters who'd come to cover the story of the woman with the perfect lawn. "I just wanted to live in peace," she said quietly. "I planted grass. I took care of it. I didn't hurt anyone. I didn't break any reasonable rules. I just tried to make something beautiful." She paused, looking directly at the HOA board members. "I developed this grass to help communities like ours survive droughts. To stay green without wasting water. To be beautiful without being expensive. I never sold it because I wanted to give it away. I wanted to share it." Her voice was steady, but everyone in the courtroom could hear the emotion underneath. Instead, you made me the enemy. You made my garden a crime. You made caring about my property a violation. You took something I created to help people and turned it into a reason to punish me." She sat back down. The courtroom was completely silent. The judge didn't need to deliberate. He dismissed the case immediately. Not only were the charges dropped, but he ordered the HOA to pay Margaret's legal fees and issue a public apology for harassment. But the real moment came after the gavel fell. Richard Pemberton, the HOA president who led the charge against Margaret's lawn, walked across the courtroom. He stopped in front of her chair and did something no one expected. He apologized. Not a legal apology, a human one. "Mrs. Chen," he said quietly, "I was wrong. We were all wrong. We saw something beautiful, and instead of asking how to create it, we tried to destroy it. I'm sorry." Margaret nodded once. Then she smiled for the first time since the whole ordeal began. "Would you like to know how to grow it?" she asked. 6 months later, Willowbrook Estates had the greenest lawns in Texas. Margaret had shared her grass hybrid with every neighbor who wanted it. The community that had once sued her for having a perfect lawn now celebrated her as their greatest asset. The drought-resistant grass was eventually adopted by communities across the Southwest. Margaret never took credit, never sought recognition. She just kept tending her garden, living quietly in a neighborhood that finally understood the difference between beauty and compliance. The HOA still exists. They still enforce rules. But now they have a new regulation. Innovation and improvement are encouraged, not punished. And Margaret's lawn is still green. Perfectly, impossibly, beautifully green. Sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones who never ask for attention. They just quietly create something wonderful and hope the world will appreciate it instead of fearing it. Margaret Chin didn't set out to change her community. She just wanted to grow grass. But in a world that often punishes excellence, her simple act of gardening became a revolution. She never needed the court case to prove her worth. She never needed the apology to know she was right. She just needed the freedom to tend her garden without being punished for making it beautiful. And maybe that's the lesson we should all remember. Sometimes the most radical act is simply refusing to lower your standards to match everyone else's expectations. Sometimes the greatest victory is just being allowed to be yourself. Margaret Chin's front yard didn't break the HOA. It broke the idea that being excellent is somehow unfair to those who choose to be average. And in a community that once tried to fine her for having grass that was too green, she kept growing, kept improving, kept proving that beautiful things don't have to be destroyed just because they make other people uncomfortable. Her lawn is still there, still green, still perfect. And now, instead of being punished for it, she's celebrated for it. Sometimes that's all it takes. Someone brave enough to keep growing, even when the world tells them they're growing too much. This story was brought to you by Heartland Tales. Before we leave you today, here's our question. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition but deserved more than anyone else? Someone who quietly created something beautiful and was punished for it instead of praised? Tell us in the comments what they meant to you and how their story changed your perspective. And if you think stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. We'll see you in the next one.